The disdainful Empress. In the middle of a war-torn world, the tiny alien Empress stood tall among her people. Her name was Lyra, a ruler born of the stars, fierce and proud. She was small in stature, but her presence was larger than life. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, and her eyes gleamed like the brightest stars. Lyra had ruled her people with an iron fist, leading them to victories and crushing anyone who dared to stand against her. She had no time for weakness, especially when it came to humans. For Lyra, humans were nothing but ants, scurrying around with their fragile bodies and foolish emotions. She had never seen them as worthy of any kind of respect. They were weak, unfit to rule a galaxy like hers. The Empress had always believed that her people were the superior race, destined to rule the universe. And to her, humans were no more than small, insignificant, and unworthy of her attention. As the war between humans and aliens raged on, Lyra's confidence never wavered. She knew her forces were strong, her strategies unbeatable. But today, things were different. Today, the tide of battle was turning. She had been separated from her troops during a fierce clash and now found herself alone, surrounded by enemy soldiers. The battle had been intense. The skies were dark with smoke, and the air was thick with the sounds of explosions. The ground shook beneath her as she ran through the thick forest, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always relied on her strength, but now she felt vulnerable. For the first time in years, she could hear the human soldiers approaching, their heavy boots crunching through the snow, and she knew they were closing in on her. Lyra's breath came in short gasps. She could feel the cold bite of the wind on her skin, but it didn't bother her. What bothered her was the realization that she might not escape this time. She had always been the one in control, the one who held the power. Now it seemed that humans would have the last laugh. As she rounded a bend, she found herself face to face with one of the human soldiers. He was tall, wearing a heavy coat with a hood that obscured most of his face. His weapon was pointed at her, and his eyes were filled with cold determination. Lyra glared at him, her pride refusing to let her show any fear. "You think you can defeat me?" she spat, her voice cold and full of scorn. "I am Lyra, Empress of the Xelari. You are nothing." The soldier didn't flinch. His expression remained neutral as he slowly lowered his weapon. For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silent stare. The snow continued to fall around them, but it felt as if the entire world had stopped. Lyra's heart raced. She was certain the human would kill her. But then, something strange happened. Instead of pulling the trigger, the soldier reached out his hand. Lyra's eyes widened in confusion. Was he mocking her? Was this some kind of trick? But the soldier's hand was steady, offering a strange, calm kind of warmth amidst the chaos. "Come with me," the soldier said quietly. "I'll get you to safety." Lyra stared at him, her mind racing. Why would a human, someone she had spent her entire life despising, offer her help? She was the Empress superior to any human. Yet here he was, offering her a chance at survival. "You dare touch me?" she hissed, taking a step back. "You think I would go anywhere with you?" The soldier didn't respond. His gaze never wavered from her, as if he was prepared to face whatever anger she threw at him. Lyra clenched her fists, ready to fight, ready to destroy the human who had dared to challenge her. But something in his eyes stopped her. There was no fear, no anger, just quiet resolve. For a brief moment, Lyra felt a strange, uncomfortable tug in her chest. She had never seen a human act like this before. He wasn't afraid of her power, nor was he intimidated by her status as Empress. It was as if he didn't care about any of the things that had made her who she was. For the first time, Lyra felt uncertain. The soldier spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to do what's right." Lyra's mind spun with questions. This human, this soldier, was offering her a hand, a lifeline in a world that had always been her enemy. She couldn't understand it, but she could sense that it was no trick. There was no malice in his voice, only sincerity. The battle raged. On behind them, the distant sounds of war reminding her of the chaos she had left behind. She had always been the one to decide others' fates. But now, for the first time, she felt as if her fate was in someone else's hands. Lyra took a deep breath and, with a reluctant glance at the soldier's outstretched hand, made the choice. She would trust him, for now, but in her heart, she still believed that humans were weak. She believed that she was far superior to him. Yet as she climbed onto his back, feeling his strength beneath her, she couldn't shake the thought, what if she was wrong? As the soldier began to run, carrying her through the snow, Lyra's thoughts were torn. She had always thought herself untouchable, the ruler of all. Now she was relying on the very species she had scorned, and so her journey began not just to safety, but into the unknown, where everything she had believed about humanity would be tested. The reluctant rescue, the cold wind whipped through the trees as the soldier ran, carrying Lyra on his back. His boots crunched through the thick snow, and his breath came in short, quick bursts. He had to keep moving, keep running, or they would both be caught. The sound of pursuing enemy soldiers echoed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Lyra clung to his shoulders, her small hands wrapped tightly around his neck, her body stiff with both cold and pride. She was not used to being in such a vulnerable position. To be carried, to rely on someone else, it was a blow to her dignity, something she had never imagined. She was the Empress, the ruler of a powerful alien race. Humans were supposed to bow before her, not the other way around. "Why are you helping me?" Lyra demanded, her voice filled with suspicion. "What do you expect from me in return?" The soldier didn't answer immediately, his focus on the task at hand. He had his eyes set on the path ahead, constantly scanning for threats. Lyra could feel his muscles tense as he ran, his breath steady and calm. It was strange he didn't seem afraid of her, nor did he appear to be trying to gain anything from this. It was as if he was simply doing what he believed was right. Finally, after a few moments of silence, he spoke. "I'm not helping you for anything in return. I'm just doing what I can to stop the war." Lyra's brow furrowed. "Stop the war," she echoed, the words unfamiliar on her tongue. "You think saving me will end the war?" The soldier gave a small, almost bitter laugh. "Not just you. If I wanted to end the war, I'd be helping everyone, human and alien alike." He paused, his voice softening. "But saving you, the Empress, might be the first step. If I can keep you alive, maybe both sides will realize there's more to humanity than just fighting." Lyra didn't know how to respond to that. She had always seen humans as weak, driven only by their instincts to survive, to fight for what they could take. But this soldier, this human, seemed different. He wasn't motivated by power, nor did he seem afraid of her wrath. There was something almost noble about his words. It made her uneasy. "I don't need your help," Lyra muttered, turning her head away, as if her pride could shield her from the situation. "I can fight for myself. I don't need a human to save me." The soldier's pace didn't slow, but there was a slight shift in his posture. a quiet acknowledgement that he had heard her words, but he didn't comment on it. He kept running, his expression unchanged, determined. They traveled through the snow-covered woods, the terrain growing more treacherous with every step. Lyra could see the distant mountains rising in the distance, the path ahead dark and foreboding. She knew they had to keep moving. Stopping would only make them more vulnerable as they navigated through the forest. Lyra's mind raced. She had never imagined herself in this position. The Empress of the Xelari, scorned by the entire universe, now relying on a human soldier to protect her. It was maddening. It felt like a betrayal of everything she had ever known. But, deep down, a part of her felt something she couldn't name. Something was shifting inside her. Something that made her question everything she had believed. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to look at the soldier more closely. His face was young, but there was a strength in his eyes, a determination. She could feel even now as he carried her through the frozen wasteland. His brow was furrowed, his lips tight, but there was no hesitation in his actions. His focus was unwavering, his care for her almost genuine. It was strange. In her entire life, she had never relied on anyone. She had always been the one to lead, to command, to make the decisions. But now, she found herself dependent on a human for survival. He had saved her, and he hadn't even asked for anything in return. A flicker of doubt began to creep into her mind. Was it possible that humans weren't all the monsters she had believed them to be? "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softer than before. The soldier hesitated for just a moment before answering. "James, James," Lyra repeated, as if testing the sound of it. She had never spoken to a human like this before. She had never cared to know their names, their lives. They were just pawns in a war to her. But now, for some reason, the name felt significant. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her pride still fighting against the vulnerability she felt. "Why risk your life to save me?" James glanced over his shoulder at her, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why, but those words, spoken so quietly yet with such conviction, stirred something deep within her. She had always thought that only the strong survive, that only the powerful deserve to live. But James was showing her something different. He wasn't fighting for power or glory. He was fighting for something else entirely. As they continued their journey through the snow-covered forest, Lyra couldn't help but wonder, could it be that humans had something to teach her after all? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, faint at first, but growing louder. The enemy was closing in. James didn't flinch. His pace quickened, and Lyra could feel his muscles tense as he prepared for whatever was coming. The battle was far from over, and Lyra, the mighty Empress, was beginning to realize that survival might depend on something she had never understood: trust. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to wonder if she could trust a human. The unexpected bond, the snowstorm intensified, swirling around them as if nature itself was trying to bury them alive. The air was thick with cold, and the distant crackling of gunfire echoed through the trees. But James didn't stop. His breath came in sharp bursts, yet he never faltered. The Empress, still clinging to his back, could feel the strength in his body as he carried her through the wilderness. She had always believed humans to be weak, fragile creatures incapable of surviving in a harsh world. But the soldier, James, was proving her wrong at every turn. Lyra's heart beat a little faster with each passing minute. She couldn't deny the strange feeling that was slowly growing inside her. a feeling she hadn't experienced before. Trust. It was foreign, unsettling. For a moment, she considered pulling away, telling him to stop, to put her down so she could fight. But the truth was, she was exhausted. The cold, the fear, and the endless battle had drained her. She was starting to realize that, maybe for the first time, she wasn't in control anymore. Are you always this stubborn? Lyra's voice was sharp, but there was no anger in it now, just curiosity. She had always been a leader, a ruler who gave commands and expected them to be followed. But here, in the wilderness, she was at the mercy of a human who barely knew her name. It was a humbling experience, one she never thought she would face. James didn't look at her as he replied, his voice steady. Stubborn, maybe, but I'm also committed to seeing this through. He paused for a moment, and Lyra could hear the soft crunch of his boots in the snow. You don't need to thank me. I'm doing this because I believe it's the right thing. Lyra frowned. The right thing, she repeated. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of his words. She had been taught that only the strong should lead, that only those who take what they need deserve to survive. But James wasn't driven by power, nor was he fighting for control. He was fighting for something deeper, something she couldn't quite understand. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of her presence on his back making the journey more difficult, but James never complained. Lyra had to admit he was more than she had first thought. Strong, resolute, and kind in a way that felt almost ... human. The sounds of their surroundings had quieted, and for a moment all that could be heard was the soft fall of snowflakes. James found a small cave, a hollow in the rocky side of the mountain, and carefully lowered Lyra to the ground. She stood, brushing the snow off her clothes, though she still felt the chill in her bones. The warmth of the cave was a small relief, but it wouldn't be enough to keep the cold from creeping into her skin. Rest, James said, his tone firm but not unkind. He was already checking his equipment, making sure he was ready for whatever came next. Lyra didn't argue. For the first time since the beginning of the war, she felt exhaustion begin to overtake her. She hadn't allowed herself to rest during the battle, had barely slept since the war began. Now, her body was demanding it. I don't need to rest, Lyra said, her voice still sharp but not as forceful as before. I need to finish what I started. James glanced up at her, his expression serious but understanding. You can't do it all at once. You need to recover. If you don't, you'll never be able to help your people. He paused, his voice softer now. You can't save anyone if you're not able to stand. Lyra hesitated, her pride making her want to argue, but something in his words made her stop. The soldier was right. She couldn't lead her people from the ground, broken and weak. She needed strength not just for herself, but for her people, for the future. It was a hard pill to swallow, but the truth was undeniable. She sat down, leaning against the cool stone wall of the cave, her eyes on James as he unpacked supplies. The flickering firelight cast soft shadows on the walls, and for the first time since the war began, Lyra felt a sense of peace. It was fleeting, like a dream, but it was real enough to make her wonder if this human, this soldier, had something to offer her that she had never considered. Why are you helping me? She asked again, her voice quieter this time. She had asked him before, but the answer hadn't made sense to her then. Maybe now, in this quiet moment, she could understand it better. James paused, looking up at her with a weary but resolute expression. Because you're more than just an empress. You're a person. and I can't stand by and watch you die if there's something I can do about it." Lyra swallowed hard, his words hitting her in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent her life believing she was superior, that her title made her untouchable, that her position meant she had the right to command, to demand respect. But now, in this moment, she was being treated like a human being, not a symbol of power. She had always feared losing control. She had always feared that showing weakness would mean her downfall. But James didn't see her as weak. He didn't care about her title or her status. To him, she was just another person, struggling to survive, for the first time. Lyra felt something stir deep inside her, small, unfamiliar seed of gratitude. It was fleeting, but it was there, and it gave her something to hold on to. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why help me when your people are fighting my people?" James' gaze softened. "Because we don't have to be enemies forever. We can change things if we're willing to try." His words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Lyra found herself believing there might be more to this war than she had ever realized. As the fire crackled, the silence in the cave deepened. Lyra's thoughts were no longer filled with anger and pride. Instead, there was a quiet sense of something new, a possibility she had never considered before. Maybe this human, this soldier, wasn't the enemy after all. Maybe he could be part of the future she had once believed was impossible. And as the night settled around them, Lyra found herself wondering if the war could truly end, if peace was something she could learn to believe in. The humans sacrificed. The night passed slowly in the cave, the soft crackling of the fire the only sound breaking the silence. Lyra sat across from James, who had already begun to pack up their belongings and prepare for the next stage of their journey. Despite the rest, she still felt the weight of exhaustion bearing down on her, and she knew it wouldn't be long before they had to move again. But something inside her had changed, something that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just the Empress, the ruler of an alien race. She was a survivor, alongside a human who had risked everything to save her. The night was bitterly cold, and the wind outside howled against the cave's entrance. Lyra's eyes flicked to James as he stood by the fire, adjusting his gear. There was an undeniable strength in him, a quiet, steady strength that reminded her of the warriors of her own people. But it wasn't just his physical strength that had caught her attention. It was the way he had carried her through the wilderness, without hesitation, without complaint. Lyra had always believed that strength came from domination, from control. But James had shown her a different kind of strength. A strength that came from compassion, from helping someone who didn't deserve it, someone who had scorned him and his people. She felt a strange pull in her chest as she watched him. There was a deep sense of respect growing inside her for this soldier. The realization was both humbling and unsettling. She had spent her entire life believing that humans were beneath her, that they were nothing compared to the Xelari. But now she wasn't so sure. "You should rest," James said, interrupting her thoughts. He was standing now, his weapon slung over his shoulder. "We need to keep moving once the storm clears, but you've had a rough day. You don't have to prove anything to me." Lyra blinked, a little startled by his concern. She hadn't expected him to care so much, especially after the way she had treated him. But here he was, showing the same level of care he had when he first saved her. "I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to hide the crack in her voice. "I don't need your pity." James looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. There was something in his gaze, something soft, almost kind, that made Lyra look away. She didn't want to show weakness. She didn't want him to see that she wasn't the untouchable Empress she once thought herself to be, but James didn't seem to care about her title, about her pride. He only cared about her survival. He only cared about doing what he thought was right. "All right," he said after a moment. "But we should keep moving at first light. We'll find somewhere safer, somewhere you can rest without worrying about being caught." Lyra nodded, though she didn't feel completely reassured. They had to keep moving, but the more they moved, the more danger they put themselves in. They were being hunted by both human soldiers and the alien forces who were still after her. The odds were against them, and Lyra knew it. She had never felt so vulnerable before. The next morning, after a restless night of sleep, they set off once more. The wind had died down, but the landscape was still a blanket of white. The snow crunched underfoot as James led the way, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of danger. Lyra walked beside him, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of what was to come. She couldn't afford to think too much about the past, but she couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the war, what had happened to her people. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice quiet, barely above a whisper. She had never asked a question like this before. The Empress never doubted herself, never showed fear, but now, with everything in chaos, the thought of failure seemed more real than ever. James didn't answer right away, his eyes on the horizon as he walked. For a moment, Lyra thought he hadn't heard her. But then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I don't know," he said, "but we'll keep fighting." Together, Lyra's chest tightened at his words. Together, she had never truly considered what that meant before. Her entire life had been about leading alone, about carrying the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. But now, for the first time, she realized that she didn't have to carry it alone. The realization was a strange one. The idea of sharing the weight, of not being the sole person responsible for everything, felt like a release. But it also terrified her. She had always believed that if she didn't lead, no one else would. She had spent her life on that belief. But now there was James, a human, a soldier. Someone who was willing to fight for her even when she had shown him nothing but disdain. They walked for hours, the landscape growing increasingly barren as they moved farther from the battlefield. Lyra had long since stopped trying to fight. The exhaustion that was pulling at her, every step felt heavier than the last, and she could feel her energy slipping away. But James kept moving forward, his determination never faltering. Then, just as they were beginning to think they had made it to safety, the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. Lyra froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The enemy was closing in. "Stay behind me," James whispered urgently, pushing her behind him. His hand was already on the rifle slung over his shoulder, ready to defend them both. But Lyra couldn't stay hidden. She had never been one to hide, to be protected. She stepped out from behind him, her eyes narrowed as she scanned the area. She couldn't let him fight alone. "I won't hide," she said firmly. "I fight too." James glanced at her, a flash of something in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or admiration. But he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded and motioned for her to stay low. As the enemy soldiers emerged from the trees, a fierce battle broke out. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the crackle of energy weapons. Lyra fought with every ounce of strength. She had her alien abilities, allowing her to take down opponents with speed and precision. But the soldiers were relentless. In the chaos, James fought beside her, protecting her even when his own life was on the line. It was clear he wasn't just trying to survive, he was trying to keep her alive, no matter the cost. Lyra's heart raced as she realized just how far he was willing to go. But just as they began to gain the upper hand, a sharp pain shot through James's side. He gasped, dropping to one knee as blood stained the snow around him. Lyra's heart stopped. "No," she shouted, rushing to his side. "Go." James gritted through clenched teeth, his face pale. "You have to get out of here." But Lyra wouldn't leave him. She had never relied on anyone, but now, for the first time, she realized that she couldn't do this alone. "Not anymore. I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely, pulling him up. The battle raged around them, but Lyra wasn't about to lose the one person who had shown her what it meant to trust. No matter what happened next, she wasn't going to let him die. She couldn't. The return to the front line, the world around them seemed to blur as Lyra helped James stumble through the snow. His wound was serious, the bleeding slow but steady, staining the snow beneath them a bright red. The enemy soldiers had been defeated, for the moment, but the price of victory had been steep. James was losing strength fast, and with each step, Lyra could feel his weight pulling her down. "Stay with me, James," she whispered, her voice urgent but laced with fear. She wasn't used to feeling this way, not when she was supposed to be. The one leading, the one who made others feel safe. But in that moment, she was just a person, as fragile as anyone else. "I'm not gonna make it much longer," James breathed out, his voice ragged. "You need to go. Finish it. Finish it." The words sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. The mission that wore it was all still waiting for her. Her people depended on her, and yet here she was, caught between saving a human soldier who had shown her more care than her own race ever had, and returning to the battlefield to finish what had been started. Her chest tightened. It was a decision she never thought she would have to make. Sacrifice her own humanity and help James, or return to the war and keep fighting as the Empress she was born to be. But in the space of a few heartbeats, she realized that it wasn't a choice, not anymore. "James," Lyra said, her voice firm, "we're both going to make it. You and me." With the last of her strength, she picked him up once more, cradling him against her body as she tried to move forward. Every part of her screamed that it was too late, that there was no way they would both survive. But the words that James had spoken echoed in her mind together. The human had shown her that strength didn't just come from domination. It came from the will to fight for something beyond oneself, to fight for someone else, no matter the odds. The pain in her chest was not just from her exhaustion, but from the weight of the realization that it was time to stop fighting for power and control. It was time to fight for peace. As they pushed through the forest, the landscape grew more treacherous. The storm from the night before had only worsened, and now the world was covered in a thick, icy blanket. Their footsteps were slow, laborious, and the distance to safety seemed endless. But Lyra's determination never wavered. She could feel James growing heavier in her arms, and she knew time was running out. Her thoughts turned to her people. She had been so focused on winning the war, on ensuring her race's supremacy, that she had never stopped to think about what it meant to survive, to truly survive, to have a future. In the distance, through the swirling snow, Lyra caught sight of a faint glow, a fire. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination, the cold playing tricks on her mind, but she pushed forward. It was their only hope, the only chance for survival. As they neared the light, Lyra could see figures moving around a small campfire. Human soldiers. Her first instinct was to retreat, to hide, to find another path. But then she saw one man standing apart from the others, his eyes locking onto hers. It was the same man who had been with James earlier, the one who had been following them. She knew in that moment that they weren't just following, they were waiting for her. Lyra approached cautiously, still holding James against her, unsure of what would happen. Her mind raced, memories of the war flashing through her mind. Every ounce of her pride screamed to turn away, to return to her people, to finish the war her way. But in her heart, something was different. The man stepped forward, a medical pack. In his hand, he wasn't armed, and his movements were slow and deliberate, as if trying not to startle her. "You found him," he said quietly, looking at James. "He's alive, but we need to help him now. You're not alone." Lyra stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. The Empress in her wanted to command, to take charge. But the person she had become in the past few days, the person James had shown her she could be, knew that she didn't need to do this alone. She nodded slowly. "Help him, please." The soldier knelt beside James and quickly set to work, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Lyra stepped back, her eyes fixed on the fire that flickered between them. She hadn't realized how much she needed the warmth, the reassurance that they weren't going to die alone in this frozen wasteland. For the first time, she allowed herself to let go of her pride. The war, the Empress, all of it seemed so distant, so irrelevant now. James had shown her a way forward, one where survival wasn't about being the strongest, the most ruthless. It was about the people you fought for, the lives you saved along the way. "We'll need to move out soon," the soldier said, glancing up at her. "The enemy's still out there." Lyra's gaze shifted from the campfire to James, still unconscious, but stable. She couldn't let him die. Not now, not after everything he had done for her. "Give him the time he needs," she said, her voice steady. "We'll make it through this. We have to." And so they waited. The fire burned brightly as the storm continued to rage around them. Lyra stood watch, her mind racing, but a strange calm had settled over her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She wasn't the empress of an entire race. She was just Lyra, person who had found an unexpected ally in a human soldier. The sound of the storm faded into the background, and all Lyra could hear now was the steady rhythm of her own breath, the pulse of life in the camp. And she realized, with a certainty she hadn't known before, that this was the fight that mattered. This was the future worth fighting for. She wasn't just fighting to win a war. She was fighting to build something better, something that could be shared by both humans and aliens. And if they made it through this, if they survived the storm and the enemies that hunted them, maybe they would have a chance to make that future a reality. But for now, all that mattered was getting James to safety. The rest could wait. The final stand, the storm had subsided by the time James regained consciousness. His head throbbed and his body felt heavy, but there was a warmth around him, a sense of safety he hadn't expected. The cold was still biting, but the fire crackled nearby, and Lyra's presence beside him grounded him in a way he hadn't experienced before. He opened his eyes slowly, his vision blurry at first, but as his sight cleared, he saw Lyra watching him intently, her violet eyes full of concern. "You're alive," he muttered, surprised by the sound of his own voice. Lyra's lips curled into a small, faint smile. "I'm surprised you didn't give up," she said quietly. You should have. You've been through too much. James chuckled weakly. I guess I'm stubborn. Stubbornness seems to run in both our veins, Lyra replied, her tone soft but with an edge of amusement. We both could have died out there, but you kept going. I don't understand it. You don't have to, James said, his voice low but steady. I'm not here for praise. I'm here because I believe we're stronger together, no matter where we come from. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, something in her eyes shifted, something vulnerable, something real. You've changed me, she whispered, more to herself than to him. James said nothing, but the weight of her words lingered between them. They were no longer two enemies who had stumbled into a temporary alliance. No, something deeper had formed between them over the past few days. A shared struggle. A shared understanding. Lyra helped him sit up slowly, supporting him as he winced in pain. We don't have much time, she said, her voice now serious and commanding. The enemy's forces are still out there, and we can't afford to. Let this be where we fall. James nodded, the resolve settling into his bones. He had come too far to stop now, not when there was a chance, however slim, that they could change the course of the war. Not when Lyra, the alien Empress, had entrusted him with her survival. We fight, James said, his voice firm. Together, with a few quick movements, he stood on his own, although he swayed slightly from the pain. Lyra didn't let go of him, her steady presence anchoring him. They didn't speak for a few moments, but the gravity of what was ahead was clear. The soldier who had treated James earlier approached them now, his eyes scanning the horizon. We've got company, he said, his voice urgent. Lyra and James exchanged a glance, the unspoken understanding passing between them. They knew what had to be done. There was no turning back. James's hand tightened around his weapon, and Lyra's eyes flickered to her own, her sharp gaze returning to the soldier's camp. She had been born to lead, to fight, and now she would do so with a new sense of purpose. Are we ready? James asked, taking a deep breath and turning. To Lyra, more than ready, she said firmly, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. For too long, I've been fighting for my people alone. It's time I fought for something else. We fight for each other. We fight for peace. The two of them stepped forward together, their comrades gathering around them, preparing for the final stand. Lyra's pulse quickened as she sensed the weight of the moment. Her heart was steady, her mind clear. They had made it this far, and there was no turning back. The enemy forces had found them. As the first shots rang out, a fierce battle broke out between the two sides. Lyra moved like a shadow, her alien agility and speed allowing her to take down enemies with precision. James was right beside her, his movements steady and calculated, protecting her at every turn. They fought not as enemies, but as allies to beings, once at war, now fighting side by side for a common goal. For Lyra, the fight felt different this time. She wasn't just fighting to protect her own race. She was fighting to protect the idea of a future where both humans and aliens could coexist, where they could put aside their differences and build something better, something they both deserved. She glanced at James as they fought. He was focused, determined, but she could see the pain in his eyes, the wound he had sustained still bothering him. It didn't matter. He wouldn't stop until this was over. The battle raged on, the crackle of weapons and the chaos of war swirling around them. But despite the violence, despite the bloodshed, there was a quiet resolve that filled the air. The tide was turning. Slowly, they were pushing the enemy back, fighting with a unity that was forged in the flames of survival. Then Lyra heard an explosion in the distance. The ground beneath them shook, and the battle paused for a moment as everyone looked toward the horizon. There, in the distance, a fleet of alien ships descended from the sky. They were hers, her people, her army, arriving just in time to tip the scales. The moment of truth had arrived. Lyra's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. This was her chance, her opportunity to show the world that there was more to her than the title of Empress. She was a leader, but more than that, she was a person who believed in a future worth fighting for. With one final push, the enemy was overwhelmed. The battle had ended, and the war was finally over. Lyra and James stood together, breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and bloodied, but alive. They had done it. They had fought not for themselves, but for the future. As the alien forces retreated, Lyra looked up at the sky, her heart filled with a sense of hope she hadn't known she was capable of. It wasn't just her victory, it was theirs. All of them. James, standing beside her, gave a small, tired smile. "You did it." Lyra glanced at him, her heart filled with a gratitude she could never put into words. "No, we did it, together." And for the first time, Lyra believed that a new world was possible, a world where both humans and aliens could stand side by side, fighting for the same future. She wasn't just the Empress anymore. She was something more, something human, and in that moment she knew they had changed the galaxy forever.